It was just after 1:00 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I was running on fumes and bad life decisions. My name is Brandon. The decision in question was trusting that I had enough coffee filters to last the week. I didn't now. Here I was, rolling into the monolithic, always open fortress of commerce known as the Supercenter, the fluorescent buzzing already settling deep into my skull. The parking lot was a graveyard of cars that looked too tired to make it home, and the air was thick with that specific combination of hot asphalt and cheap plastic you only get near the loading docks. Everything felt normal, boring, predictable, and irritating. But the moment I pushed through the second set of automatic doors, the air didn't just feel thick. It felt wrong. It felt expectant. The greeter station was empty, which was standard for this hour, but what wasn't standard was the silence. Usually, even at 1 a.m., there's a distant clatter of a pallet jack or the tinny echo of a radio. Tonight, it was only the relentless, high-pitched whine of the lights above. I grabbed one of the newer carts, the ones with the slightly stiff plastic handles, and started walking toward aisle D, where the coffee and baking supplies lived. That's when I saw the first thing that really snagged my attention, not with fear, but with a cold, administrative confusion. It was a single, perfectly arranged set of fishing lures laid out meticulously on the display pedestal where the latest video games usually sat. They weren't just tossed there. They were fanned out like a hand of cards, glinting under the harsh light, miles away from the sporting goods section. I paused, staring at the iridescent scales and tiny hooks, trying to make the mental jump from Madden 25 to bait casting, but it made no sense. It was the first time I felt like I was looking at something placed there, specifically for me to notice. A misplaced period in the sentence of my routine trip, and I couldn't shake the prickle of curiosity mixed with a growing sense of intrusion. I told myself it was just a bored midnight stalker's idea of a joke, but the way those sharp hooks caught the light felt like a silent, deliberate invitation into something much weirder than a late-night joke. I shook off the weirdness of the lures and started making my way past seasonal, which was still full of half-off Halloween candy, even though it was already mid-November, and into the main stretch of the store. The aisles seemed longer tonight, stretching out like canyons carved from industrial shelving, the tops disappearing into a ceiling so high it felt like the fluorescent strips were just reflecting off the inside of a massive, inverted dome. I kept expecting to see someone, maybe a third-shift janitor with a scrub machine, or even a lone cashier texting behind the register. But the place was utterly deserted. The only sound was the irritating click-clack of my cartwheels against the polished concrete, a sound that seemed to amplify and echo until it sounded less like wheels and more like a metronome counting down to an unknown deadline. It was the kind of isolation that makes you hyper-aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat. As I rounded the corner into the dry goods section, I finally saw another human being. She was an employee, or at least she wore the familiar blue vest, but something was off. She was standing perfectly still in the middle of aisle H, facing the massive wall of bulk cereals, her back to me. She was short, with dark hair tied back in a neat bun, and she wasn't moving. Not stalking, not looking at her phone, just standing. When I got closer, planning to ask for directions to the coffee filters just to break the silence, I noticed how rigid she was. Her arms hanging stiffly at her sides. I cleared my throat, ready to apologize for disturbing her intense focus on bran flakes, but before I could speak, she began to move. It wasn't a natural turn. It was a slow mechanical rotation, like a mannequin on a display pedestal, her head and body pivoting as a single unit, ending with her facing me directly. Her eyes were wide, unnaturally so, reflecting the fluorescent light back at me like two flat, white discs. The most unsettling thing, though, was her smile. It was perfect, too wide, showing all her teeth, but it was fixed, like something carved out of wood and varnished. It didn't reach her eyes at all. "Welcome," she whispered, and the sound was dry, raspy, and much too loud in the silent store, cutting through the hum like tearing paper. "Are you finding everything well, Brandon?" My blood went instantly cold. I hadn't seen her before. I hadn't spoken to anyone, and she knew my name. I didn't have a name tag. I hadn't used a credit card yet, and I was sure I hadn't been here recently enough for anyone to remember me. Sorry. How did you know my name?" I stammered, gripping the cart handle so hard my knuckles turned white. The smile didn't change, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "We know all our late-night guests, Brandon. You are a frequent visitor to the necessities." She gestured vaguely down the aisle with one stiff hand, and her blue vest shifted, revealing that it was oddly clean, almost brand new, lacking the wear and tear of a typical stalker's uniform. "Coffee filters are on the next aisle, but I recommend a different brand tonight. The Solstice brand. It is optimally filtered." I mumbled a quick thanks and pushed my cart past her, trying not to run, trying to maintain the illusion of a normal person doing a normal task. As soon as I was past the canned vegetable display, I glanced back. She was still standing in the exact same spot, now facing the cereal wall again, perfectly motionless, just waiting. The moment I was out of her sight, I felt a desperate need to find the filters and get out. I took the corner too fast, nearly tipping the cart, and slammed into a display of cheap, brightly colored beach towels. They weren't supposed to be here. Beach towels were seasonal, near the back of the store. It was November. The filters were indeed there, exactly where she said. But the Solstice brand she mentioned wasn't on the shelf. Instead, I saw a package of generic, plain white filters, but the package art was a little different. Instead of a stock photo of a happy family drinking coffee, it was a blurred, slightly greenish photograph of a man's face, seen from the side, looking down. It was my face, a deeply unflattering, slightly worried profile of me. The brand name above it was just a series of random, blocky letters, seemingly cut out from different magazines and pasted together. My entire body felt like it was humming with a frantic energy I couldn't control. I snatched the regular filters, the ones with the familiar generic artwork, and threw them into the cart. I tried to backtrack to the main entrance, but the store layout was actively resisting me. I took the main thoroughfare, planning to pass the checkout lanes, and punched out. But instead of the wall of discounted impulse buys and the massive welcome banner, I found myself staring down a row of identical stacked crates containing industrial-sized rolls of shrink wrap. The ceiling was lower here, and the light flickered, casting nervous, twitching shadows. It was a section of the store I had never seen before, the deepest recesses of the back stockroom, but it was open, accessible, and impossibly integrated into the main shopping area. I checked my phone. No signal. Just the time, 1:38 a.m., and the battery was somehow already at 3%. Panic started to bubble up, acidic and hot in my throat. I turned the cart around and pushed it faster, deciding to stick to the perimeter. I was trying to find a fire exit, anything that would get me outside and under the real, dark sky, away from the synthetic yellow glow. I passed the sporting goods section, but it was entirely empty. No fishing lures, no camping gear, just bare metal shelving, organized and clean, stretching for what felt like football fields. It was an empty void, echoing my own growing emptiness of hope. Then I heard another sound. It was coming from the electronics section, which was mercifully visible, glowing faintly with the displays of muted TVs. It wasn't the sound of an employee or a scrub machine. It was a faint, repetitive thump-tap, thump-tap. I moved cautiously toward it, my cart abandoned near a display of discounted tires. The sound was coming from behind the locked glass cabinets containing the expensive headphones. Pressed against the glass, on the inside, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. She had long, pale blonde hair that was matted to her forehead, and she was wearing a faded, smudged pink dress. Her face was tear-streaked, but her expression wasn't one of outright fear. It was one of intense, weary focus. She was slowly, methodically, hitting the glass with the heel of her tiny, worn-out shoe, thump tap, thump tap. She looked up and saw me, and her expression didn't change, but her thumping intensified, becoming faster, more desperate. I rushed to the glass, rattling the handle. "Hey, are you okay? Where is your mom? How did you get in there?" The girl stopped thumping, brought her hands up to the glass, and placed her palms against it. She dragged her fingers down slowly, leaving foggy streaks on the clean surface. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then she opened her mouth wide and pointed down her own throat, her finger disappearing slightly past her teeth. Her eyes, pale blue and lifeless, locked onto mine. She wasn't just trapped behind glass. She was utterly silent, unable to scream, unable to talk. The realization hit me. This glass wasn't just a cabinet. It was a containment field, and she had been in there for a long, long time. I hammered on the glass, yelling, "I'm going to find a key. Just stay right there." I spun around, intent on running back toward the front of the store, back toward the weirdly cheerful employee, needing help now more than ever. But when I turned, she was standing directly behind me. The employee in the pristine blue vest. She was so close I could smell the faint, synthetic scent of industrial cleaner on her uniform. I jumped back, stumbling over the display of cheap charging cables. "Looking for a key, Brandon?" she asked, her fixed smile widening impossibly. I noticed her teeth were too perfectly white, almost translucent. "The little girl, she's locked in the display. We have to get her out," I pleaded, pointing back at the cabinet. The employee turned her head, slowly, mechanically, toward the electronics section. She looked at the little girl, who was now huddled in a fetal position in the corner of the cabinet, silent tears leaking down her face. "That is merely inventory, Brandon. Inventory that is currently scheduled for consolidation. It is not advisable to interfere with the consolidation process." "Consolidation? She's a child!" I screamed. I tried to push past the woman, but she didn't budge. She was solid, heavy, like a column of concrete. She reached out, and her hand closed around my upper arm. Her grip was cold, immensely strong, and utterly devoid of feeling. It was like being grabbed by a hydraulic clamp. "Your items, Brandon," she hissed, pulling me back toward the long, empty aisles. "You have forgotten your items. You came for the filters. They are waiting for you in the cart. You must complete the purchase. This is the only way to exit the facility." I fought her, but it was useless. Her strength was overwhelming. I was dragged past the endless rows of empty, clean shelving, past the area where the beach towels had been, which was now an immaculate, empty stretch of floor. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to dim, then surge, pulse, and flicker in time with the metronome rhythm of my own terror-fueled heart. We passed another customer, a man in a rumpled suit pushing a cart filled entirely with identical empty glass jars, each jar labeled with a faded, handwritten tag that simply read, "Loss." He walked with his head down, paying no attention to my struggles, just silently pushing his inventory of loss. I realized this wasn't a store for shopping. It was a store for trapping, for endless, futile wandering. This was a massive consumer purgatory, organized and managed by creatures whose only purpose was to ensure the transaction was completed, my transaction. The employee forced me back to my abandoned cart. The coffee filters, the ones with my blurred, terrified profile on the packaging, were sitting right on top. They were the only thing in the basket. The employee released my arm, and I nearly collapsed. She simply pointed a rigid finger down the final endless aisle. The checkout lane is designated Exit Strategy 0. Please proceed to the conclusion of your required task. The checkout lane was not the typical cluttered area. It was a single, massive, black conveyor belt that extended into the far distance, disappearing into a section of the store that was pitch black, a void that seemed to actively consume the light. There was no register, no scanner, just the belt leading into the darkness, and a single, low, metallic pedestal at the very start, waiting. The air here was colder, smelling faintly of ozone and dust. I stood there, staring into the oily, reflective surface of the black conveyor belt. The employee stood silently behind me, her presence a cold weight on my spine. The little girl in the glass was forgotten for a moment, the vast, humming store reducing my entire existence to this one, final, terrifying decision. I knew, with the kind of terrible certainty that transcends logic, that if I placed those filters on the belt, I would be initiating something irreversible. I would be completing the transaction, finalizing my inventory, and the exit strategy would engage. But if I didn't, would I simply be stuck here forever, wandering the shifting aisles, watching the girl starve behind the glass, slowly becoming one of the store's resident, lost customers, like the man collecting jars of loss? My coffee filter crisis had escalated into an existential trade-off. I looked at the package in my hands, the terrifying, blurry image of my own face staring back, branded as random block letters. I had to fight this. I had to break the routine. Don't comply, Brandon. Don't give them what they want. You came for filters, not damnation. I knew the only way out wasn't through the designated Exit Strategy 0. The way out had to be an anomaly, a disruption. I clenched my jaw, feeling the heavy, cold presence of the employee breathing down my neck, waiting for me to obey the store's dark logic. If there's a loophole, a weakness in this sterile nightmare, it's not in the path of least resistance. I had to find a way to make noise, to break the perfection of their controlled environment. I had to choose chaos over completion. My survival depended on me refusing to be purchased. Instead of placing the filters on the black conveyor belt, I spun around, grabbing the package tighter. The employee's fixed smile didn't waver, but her body tensed, the rigid stillness replaced by a vibration, like a massive electric current was running through her. "Brandon," she whispered, her voice layered with static and the high-pitched drone of the overhead lights. "Compliance is mandatory. The transaction must be completed." "No," I choked out, my voice raw and loud, a desperate human sound in a place designed for silence. "This isn't a store, and I'm not buying anything." Before she could react, I tore the package of filters in half. The sound was surprisingly loud, a sharp, violent rip that seemed to momentarily stutter the store's constant electronic hum. The filters scattered onto the polished concrete, landing like a pile of white, defeated leaves. The employee let out a sound that was a sickening mix of a modem, connecting and tearing fabric. Her face didn't move, but the skin around her eyes began to crack, thin fissures spreading out like lines on ancient pottery. Then, the fluorescent lights above us went completely dark, plunging the immediate area into an absolute void, broken only by the faint, distant glow of the checkout area. When the lights flickered back on a second later, she was gone. The black conveyor belt was gone. The empty aisles were gone. I was standing in a small, damp storage closet, lit by a single, weak yellow bulb hanging from a frayed cord. The air smelled of mold and stale water. I was sweating profusely, my heart hammering. There was a metal door on the far wall labeled simply, "Employees only. Do not exit." I rushed to the door, realizing I was back in the familiar, ugly reality of the Walmart stockroom. I threw the bolt and kicked the door open. I stumbled out into the main stock area. Pallet jacks, cardboard boxes, and real, dirty employees working diligently under the normal, irritating hum of the overhead lights. I saw the back of the store, the loading docks, and the faint blue light of the security monitors. But what truly shattered me, what revealed the dark, awful truth of the entire experience, was the employee I recognized immediately. She was sitting on an overturned plastic bucket, rubbing her temples, talking to a tired-looking stalker. She was the woman from the aisle, the one with the pristine vest and the inhuman strength. Now she was just tired, wearing a slightly dirty uniform, her hair a mess, her name tag reading Brenda. I swear, Greg, I keep dreaming I'm stuck out there with the customers all night. She muttered, not seeing me. And there's this one guy, Brandon, who always comes in for coffee filters. But every time I try to help him, he just gets this terrified look on his face, like he's seen a ghost, and runs off without buying anything. It's like a broken record. It just resets. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, and in my right hand, still crumpled and moist with sweat, was a small torn piece of the coffee filter packaging. On it, in blurred greenish ink, was the outline of my own terrified profile. I realized I hadn't been trapped in the Walmart. I had been trapped in a moment, in a recurring nightmare shared between a tired, overworked employee named Brenda and my own necessity for late-night coffee filters. The vast, shifting store, the mechanical rigidity, the perfect, terrifying smile. It wasn't some hell dimension, but the exhausted, detached perception of an employee who sees the same few customers repeat the same futile tasks every single night until they become predictable, repeatable, and non-human inventory. We were both trapped in her cycle, and every time I chose to comply, I extended the loop. By choosing chaos and tearing the filter, I had simply forced the system to reboot. I looked at the clock on the stockroom wall. 1:00 a.m., exactly the time I had walked in. I hadn't been in the store for nearly 40 minutes. I had been in a loop that lasted less than a minute. I turned and ran, bolting out the back fire exit and into the freezing November air, never looking back at the familiar, terrifying blue vest of the woman who was forever waiting for me to buy my filters.